Thanks so much for joining us here on 90s Plus. Chris Bianchi, joined by our 90s medical expert, Dr. Pyle Coley, for a look at melatonin overdoses amongst children. It's been a big, I don't know if epidemic's the word, but a big spike. A recent report showed a 530% increase in a decade-old growth in terms of melatonin overdoses amongst children. Dr. Pyle Coley, I want to start by asking you simply and maybe dumbly here, what is melatonin? What does it do to our body?
Yeah, so melatonin is something that's available over the counter. It's usually used for sleep as a sleep aid, and it's actually a chemical produced by a little gland in our brain that helps regulate our sleep and wake cycle. So, for example, when it gets dark outside, the little gland is supposed to release melatonin and tell our bodies it's time to go to sleep, and that's how we fall asleep. So people often use it, Chris, for things like jet lag, because you go to a different time zone, your brain still thinks it's light out because that's the cycle you've adjusted to, but it's actually dark, so you want to try to reset it. So it's become really popular as an over-the-counter supplement, and I put that in quotations, for people to use as a sleep aid. But actually, taken in excess, you can actually do the opposite. You can disrupt your circadian rhythm, which is your inside body clock. Because the idea is to try to adjust your body clock to the day and light. Day and darkness, but if you end up taking too much melatonin, you can actually have paradoxical effects on your body clock. And of course, there's a lot of dangers of taking this supplement as well, which is not as tightly regulated as drugs.
Okay, so that's the kind of overview. What should we know about children and how they react to melatonin?
Yeah, I mean, children are a lot smaller than us, and if they're taking adult-sized doses of melatonin, and what we're seeing is one of the reasons for this sudden increase in the number of kids overdoses is because of access. So kids are now more at home, and there's more melatonin sitting around, and a lot of parents don't think of melatonin as a drug or a medication, think of it more like a vitamin. So it's not necessarily locked up or kept out of reach of younger kids. So many of these are actually accidental overdoses. We also have some experts and kids experts who actually recommend children to take melatonin. And before you do that, of course, you need to talk to your pediatrician. But that can also go awry because, again, if you start to get too much melatonin on board, then dependence on melatonin, needing more and more of it to achieve the same result can also be an issue. And then finally is the fact that it's not FDA regulated because it falls under the supplement category and not under a drug. So the problem is that we've seen a lot of mislabeling occurring. So if there's a certain amount of melatonin listed on the label, the actual amount in the pill may be several-fold higher than what's listed on the label. And for adults, because we're bigger, we have a bigger volume of our body, basically, it doesn't have as much profound of an effect, but in children it certainly can.
I mean, I was going to say, one of the things that you mentioned that I really identify with is I do think that most people see it as this almost supplementy thing. Are there calls on the FDA to get rid of its supplement status and make it more of an actual drug?
I think that would be the right thing to do. I think the FDA has so much on their plate that so many things out there, whether it's saw palmetto or turmeric or melatonin or all the other things that fall into supplements, they don't regulate as tightly. Now, my call to our viewers would be that you don't think of supplements as just vitamins. You think of supplements as a mini drug. It's a medication. And I have many patients, for example, that come in taking supplements, lots of supplements, and they're affecting the way their liver works, or they're interacting with their prescription medication. So if you are somebody who thinks about maybe taking a supplement, one of the best things to do is to talk to your doctor. A second option is to talk to your pharmacist when you're actually going to fill your prescription and say, I was thinking of taking X supplement. Is there any interaction with my medications?
So what is leading, I mean, you kind of alluded to it, but what is leading to this huge spike amongst children? Is it, you mentioned it's access, is there anything else beyond it? Are we learning things about melatonin as we speak?
I think access is an issue. I think cultural attitudes about melatonin being more of a vitamin. I think more and more doctors and health experts, some of them recommending melatonin for kids. But the problem with melatonin, too much of it can actually cause paradoxical agitation because we know when kids have trouble with sleep, we have very limited options in our kids. Because many of the medicines that we use in adults that are habit forming, for example, Ambien and Lunesta, many of those others, we may not necessarily want to use those types of medications in our kids. So we have very limited options for sleep medications in kids, and we know that dysregulated sleep can cause a whole host of other problems in our kids. So I think it's a combination of many different factors that's leading to sort of more and more societal acceptance of melatonin. But I think parents really need to think of it as a wake-up call, especially if they have melatonin in their home, about how to change access to it, how to educate their kids about it, especially if they're older kids like teenagers and such, because we're also seeing that population taking an excess of melatonin sometimes, either recreationally or, you know, in an overdose attempt and those types of issues.
What are some early signs that you could have overdose of melatonin?
So usually sleepiness, drowsiness, because remember, triggers kind of that sleep sensation. You can have unresponsiveness in the extreme case, but paradoxically, sometimes in young kids, it can actually cause agitation as well. So if your child is not behaving how they normally should, either being excessively tired or excessively active, and you think that they may be at risk for a melatonin overdose, it's a very good idea early to call a poison control center. You know, check the bottle, see if there's pills missing, see if the cap may have been left off, something like that, and make sure you get them connected pretty early to care.
So to repeat, in terms of if you think your kid or child may have overdosed on melatonin, call poison control and check around to see if there's missing melatonin.
Yeah, or missing
Anything
anything for that matter. You know, just check your entire medicine cabinet and check the child's room, those types of things. Besides that, there's not much else to do. Unfortunately, even the doctors, they may not be able to do a lot. Sometimes they do something called a lavage, where they actually, you know, put in a catheter in the nose and actually kind of suck out whatever might be in the stomach. So if it's recent, you think it's just happened, that's a good idea, because then you can actually sort of clean out the stomach. There's also other medications that they could give to prevent absorption of anything that the child has taken in, medicines to induce vomiting. Those are the ways that we usually treat overdoses, particularly in children. But again, very important to get connected. Don't try any of this at home, but just call the Poison Control Center. And if you're not sure, that's what their job is, to help you figure out, based on the signs and symptoms that your child is displaying, if there might have been an overdose, and then if so, what the offending agent may have been.
Any alternatives? So let's say you got a kid who just can't sleep. What do you suggest to them instead?
Yeah. You know, I think you have to talk to your pediatrician before using any kind of sleep aid in kids. I know parents often reach for Benadryl. I have a friend who gives her child a little Benadryl just before they get on a plane every time, so that it makes for a nice plane ride for everybody. And so we feel very comfortable with these over-the-counter medications. But when it comes to our children, first talk to the child's doctor, and then just be really careful about the doses, the frequencies, and don't get, you know, lulled into the false sense of security that it's available over the counter, so it might not be toxic, because we've even seen, obviously, Benadryl overdoses and such occur in kids.
So be careful. It's not candy, essentially. That's again, you know, I think growing up, I think we all saw varying levels of that. Just again, some of these medicines may be just treated like whatever.
Right. And we just talked about interactions with drugs, but they could interact with substances like alcohol. You know, if we drink alcohol, or, you know, use any other kind of agents, smoke marijuana, all of those types of these kinds of medications can have effects and interact with those as well.
So that can enhance the possibilities of
the toxicity of the side effects, exactly. And so for example, sleeping pills and alcohol don't mix. And melatonin and alcohol I would not advise together either, because they have additive effects. They kind of add on top of each other, sometimes even synergistic effects, where they make each other's toxicity a little bit worse. So you just have to be really careful, again, when you're putting something inside your body, especially if it's a supplement that's not FDA regulated, that you really have a very good grasp on exactly what you're doing, how frequently you're doing it, and especially if we're doing it to our children.
All right. Finger wag. Be careful out there. Dr. Pyle Coley, thanks so much for your time here on 90s Plus.